I come through the ring, I notice everybody. I can hear you breathing. I can hear you talking. I hear everything. I hear my friends talking. I don't understand, but I hear them talking. I hear the words. I hear their voices. I hear everything. I see everyone, but I hear more than I see them. No one's focused where they say they don't hear anything. And when you're really focused, you hear everything.
Mike Tyson, dressed in a simple gray t-shirt, stepped out of the mall, enjoying a peaceful afternoon. As he walked toward his sleek black sports car, a racist cop suddenly blocked his path, accusing him of stealing the vehicle. The words quickly turned into heated insults, and when Mike calmly defended himself, the officer, blinded by arrogance, swung his baton at Tyson. However, the moment the baton moved, everything changed. Subscribe and like this video to see how this story unfolds. The sun's vibrant rays bathed the exterior of the high-end mall, casting a golden hue over the sidewalks as shoppers ebbed and flowed through the bustling streets. Amidst the hustle and bustle, a sleek black sports car stood out, a glimmering beacon of luxury parked near the entrance. Into this picturesque scene emerged the formidable figure of Mike Tyson, his powerful frame clad in a simple gray t-shirt. A small shopping bag cradled in his grasp, a contented smile spread across Tyson's face as he surveyed the surroundings, his eyes twinkling with an almost childlike delight. "Man, I still love a good shopping day," he muttered to himself. His words reflected his enduring passion for retail therapy. Despite his storied career and legendary status, Tyson remained a man of simple pleasures, finding joy in the act of wandering through the maze of stores and indulging his tastes. Just as Tyson neared his sports car, intent on his next adventure, a figure materialized out of thin air, obstructing his path. Officer Reynolds, a towering man with rippling muscles and a countenance chiseled from stone, stood before the boxer. His imposing presence was a stark contrast to Tyson's casual demeanor. Reynolds' expression was hard and uncompromising, betraying none of the intentions that lurked within his mind. But the glint in his eye hinted at the storm that was about to brew. "Whoa, whoa!" Reynolds said, his voice cutting through the air, laced with a hint of challenge. "Where do you think you're going?" The officer's words, dripping with authority and disdain, sent a ripple of tension through the atmosphere. The weight of his presence now bore down upon Tyson like a hammer poised to strike. Tyson's brow furrowed slightly, a flicker of confusion momentarily clouding his expression. To my car," Tyson responded, his words laced with a hint of uncertainty. It was a simple question, a basic query that would normally warrant little response. But in the face of Reynolds' aggressive posture, it felt like a loaded inquiry. The air crackled with static, each passing second a hair's breadth away from unraveling into chaos. Reynolds' smirk grew, his lips curling into a sneer as he probed deeper. "That's your car?" he asked, his tone laced with mock incredulity. The question, seemingly innocuous on the surface, carried with it the insidious suggestion that Tyson could not possibly afford such a high-end vehicle. It was a thinly veiled attack on both his financial status and his credibility. The officer's veiled barbs, meant to disarm and demean, struck like a viper, designed to inflict the maximum psychological damage. With a slow, deliberate motion, Officer Reynolds allowed his gaze to drift up and down Tyson's frame, his eyes narrowing into a contemptuous sneer. "That's funny," he muttered, his words dripping with scorn. "Don't usually see guys like you driving something this nice." The officer's gaze was like a physical assault, a naked display of racial profiling that exposed the deep-seated bigotry festering within him. His words, thinly veiled under a pretense of curiosity, were little more than an insult, an attempt to belittle Tyson based on the color of his skin. As the exchange between Tyson and Reynolds escalated, a wave of tension rippled outward, spreading through the parking lot like a stone thrown into a pond. Shoppers who had previously been oblivious to the brewing storm slowed their steps, their gazes drawn to the spectacle unfolding before them. A couple originally intent on their shopping found their attention diverted. Their curiosity piqued, they stood, watching the scene unfold with expressions of fascination and apprehension, mirroring the unease now permeating the air. Determined to remain composed in the face of Reynolds' hostility, Tyson held up his keys. the jingle of metal against metal punctuating his assertion. "Yeah, it's mine," he said, his tone even and controlled. The words were a quiet testament to his self-control and restraint. "Got the keys right here," he continued, his voice carrying a quiet defiance. The sound of the keys was a silent challenge to the officer, a subtle but unmistakable assertion of his ownership. Even in this moment of confrontation, Tyson retained an air of dignity and self-possession, refusing to stoop to Reynolds' level. It was a mark of his character, his unshakable confidence in his own identity and rights. Officer Reynolds, bristling with malice, crossed his arms, a gesture that reflected his intransigence and growing hostility. "Keys don't mean a thing," he replied, his voice laced with a brittle edge. "I've seen plenty of carjackers holding stolen keys." The accusation, a spurious claim at best, was designed to provoke Tyson, to elicit a response that would justify further escalation. Reynolds' smug assertion, while unfounded, was a reminder that even here, in broad daylight and amidst a crowd of onlookers, the law was not necessarily on Tyson's side. Tyson, the last remnants of his patience now stretched to the breaking point, let out a soft sigh. It was a measured exhalation of breath, one that spoke volumes about the situation. "Look, officer," he said, his words carrying a tinge of frustration, "I don't want any trouble, but this car is registered under my name. You can run a check if you want." The boxer's response, while still respectful, belied the growing agitation within him, a weariness at the injustice of the encounter that threatened to boil over into something more dangerous. Officer Reynolds, emboldened by Tyson's mounting frustration, let out a mocking laugh. The sound of it sent a shiver down the boxer's spine. "Funny," he jeered, his lips curling into a smirk. "I don't take orders from thugs." The accusation, a blatant display of racism and police abuse, stung Tyson to the core. But even now, he refused to give Reynolds the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. He stood tall, his posture unwavering, his face a mask of calm, despite the boiling anger just beneath the surface. "You don't look like someone who legally owns a car like this," Reynolds sneered, his words dripping with scorn. The implication was clear. Tyson, in Reynolds' eyes, could not possibly afford such a car, nor was he entitled to own it. The officer's words were not just an insult to Tyson's wealth, but also an attack on his very right to exist in the space he was occupying. The tension in the air was palpable as the crowd around them began to murmur, the conflict drawing more attention by the second. Mike Tyson, a man who had been in countless high-pressure situations inside the ring, now found himself facing an equally formidable adversary in the form of a racist cop determined to escalate the encounter. But Tyson, ever the fighter, was not about to back down. In that moment, everything seemed to hang in the balance. The crowd watched in silence, the weight of the situation sinking in. The story that was unfolding before them was not just about a confrontation between a boxer and a cop. It was a microcosm of the racial tensions that had plagued society for far too long. As Officer Reynolds continued to taunt and provoke, Tyson remained calm. He knew that reacting in anger would only give the officer what he wanted, an excuse to escalate the situation further. But Tyson also knew that he could not allow this injustice to continue unchecked. He had lived through battles far greater than this, and he was not about to let this racist cop win. As the standoff continued, it was clear that Tyson's composure and restraint would be his greatest weapon in this battle for dignity and respect. And so the situation continued to unfold, with the crowd watching intently as Tyson stood firm, refusing to be intimidated, while Reynolds raged against the man who would not be moved. The moment was a testament to Tyson's strength, not just in the ring, but in life itself. He had faced down countless opponents in his career, but this confrontation, in many ways, was the most important of all. His words were like a poisonous dagger aimed directly at Tyson's self-worth. The crowd, their eyes fixed on the unfolding drama, gasped in unison. The collective intake of breath was a testament to the shock they felt at Reynolds' blatant disregard for the truth. Tyson, steeling himself against the barrage of insults, clenched his jaw, the tension visible in the hardened lines of his face. Yet despite the palpable rage coursing through his veins, he maintained his composure, refusing to give Reynolds the satisfaction of seeing him unravel. Like a boxer in the ring, he danced around the officer, verbal jabs dodging each blow with deft agility, biding his time until the perfect moment to strike. Reynolds, emboldened by the lack of resistance, took a step closer, closing the gap between himself and Tyson. His body language was tense and threatening, and it screamed of impending violence. The air crackled with menace as he towered over Tyson, his presence almost suffocating. "How about you step away from the car, tough guy?" he growled, the venom in his voice palpable. "Hands where I can see them," he added, his words carrying the weight of authority and the implicit threat of force. Tyson sighed, the exhale escaping his lips as he placed his shopping bag atop the car's hood. His posture exuded a mix of resignation and defiance. "Officer, I'm not looking for any problems," he stated, his words almost pleading for reason in an unreasonable situation. Yet even as he sought to de-escalate the confrontation, his stance remained unyielding. His feet were rooted to the ground like pillars of granite. He would not be bullied by Reynolds, nor would he back down in the face of injustice. Reynolds, undeterred by Tyson's pleas for calm, continued to poke the proverbial bear. A cruel smirk twisted his features. "Yeah," he sneered, his tone laced with derision. "Well, you found one." The officer's words were venomous and dripping with malice as he taunted the former champion. In Reynolds' mind, Tyson's fame and accomplishments counted for nothing. To him, the boxer was just another black man to be put in his place, another criminal waiting to happen. Without warning, Officer Reynolds lashed out with his baton, the weapon whistling through the air as he aimed for Tyson's ribs. The crowd, their shocked gasps echoing through the air, watched in stunned silence as the attack unfolded before them. But in that split second before the baton could connect, a miracle occurred. Tyson, with a speed that defied belief, twisted to the side, the blow glancing harmlessly off his shoulder. It was a testament to his reflexes, honed to razor-sharp precision through years of boxing training. With the agility of a panther, Tyson dodged the attack, the ripples of adrenaline coursing through his body as he danced away from Reynolds' wild strike. "Whoa!" he exclaimed, his voice a mix of shock and amusement. "That's how we do things now?" The question hung in the air, heavy with sarcasm and irony. Tyson, for all his size and strength, had not lost the quick wit that had served him so well in the ring, and he used it now to highlight the absurdity of Reynolds' actions. Tyson's movement was poetry in motion, a symphony of grace and agility, as he effortlessly sidestepped the baton's trajectory. The weapon failed to connect and arced harmlessly past him. Reynolds' momentum carried him forward, the force of his missed swing leaving him momentarily off balance. For a brief moment, the officer teetered, his own aggression betraying him. But Tyson, ever the predator, saw the opening and seized it with ruthless precision. Reynolds, his ego bruised, glared at Tyson with a mix of rage and frustration, gripping his baton with a white-knuckled intensity. "Think you're fast, huh?" he snarled, the question a venomous barb hurled at Tyson's feet. The words were a challenge, a thinly veiled provocation designed to draw the former champion into battle. Reynolds, goaded by his own arrogance and bigotry, had stepped beyond the bounds of his authority, transforming from law enforcer to aggressor in the blink of an eye. Consumed by his fury, Reynolds swung again. The baton whistled through the air like a snake, its venomous bite aimed directly at Tyson's shoulder. But the former champion wasn't having any of it. With a speed and agility that defied comprehension, Tyson snatched the baton from its trajectory, halting it mid-swing with a deft movement of his hand. The crowd, their murmurs a chorus of awe and disbelief, scrambled for their phones, eager to capture this moment of superhuman prowess. Tyson, his movements now infused with a smirk of satisfaction, let out a soft chuckle as he held the baton aloft. "Officer, I don't know what your problem is," he said, his voice a perfect blend of calmness and authority. His words carried the weight of reasonableness, but his tone was firm. "I suggest you chill out before you embarrass yourself." The warning, delivered with the tone of a sage, was both a display of mercy and a veiled threat. Reynolds' face contorted in a rush of anger as he strained to regain control of his weapon. "Let go, punk!" he barked, his words laced with panic and frustration. The baton, held fast in Tyson's vice-like grip, refused to yield, a symbol of the boxer's superiority in this moment of conflict. Reynolds, unable to mask his fear and humiliation, fought against the rising tide of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. With a small flick of his wrist, Tyson released the baton, the movement imbued with a subtle force that sent Reynolds stumbling backward. His own weight and pride conspired against him, and the crowd, witnessing the effortless display of power, gasped as one. The collective exhalation was an audible expression of disbelief. Tyson, his smirk now a full-blown grin, stood his ground, his body language oozing confidence and command. As the crowd began to realize the true identity of the man at the center of the unfolding drama, a murmur of recognition rippled through their ranks. "Is that Mike Tyson?" a voice whispered, its hushed tones laced with a mix of awe and disbelief. Others, their eyes widening in recognition, began to whisper excitedly among themselves, exchanging looks of surprise and admiration. Reynolds, still unaware of Tyson's fame, mistook the buzz for further disrespect. His anger reached a fever pitch. Tyson, undeterred by the growing chaos around him, remained rooted to the spot. His gaze was a laser beam of focus, trained on the increasingly volatile Officer Reynolds. Still clutching his baton, Reynolds seemed to sense the shift in the air. The whispers and murmurs of the crowd seeped into his consciousness, and he hesitated. His grip loosened just a fraction as doubt began to gnaw at him, like a storm brewing on the horizon. Reynolds' self-assuredness began to cloud as the realization of his precarious position dawned upon him with terrifying clarity. Tyson, sensing the shifting balance of power, leaned in closer. His voice, steady and calm, carried an intensity that sent shivers down Reynolds' spine. "You know," Tyson began, his words carrying the weight of experience that belied his age, "I spent my whole life fighting, not just in the ring, but out here too. People like you. I've seen them before, always looking down, always thinking they're better." The boxer's speech, a masterclass in restraint and poise, was an indictment of Reynolds' bigotry, a warning that he was not to be underestimated. Reynolds, his grip now white-knuckled and vice-like, trembled with the rage of a cornered animal. He struggled to maintain his composure, his fingers quivering like live wires. But Tyson's words had burrowed deep, their impact shattering his resolve. The officer's breathing, now labored and ragged, betrayed his inner turmoil. He clenched his teeth, attempting to regain control, but his facade was crumbling. The realization of his mistake was dawning upon him, like a thunderclap in the darkness. Tyson, sensing his victory, leaned in closer, and with a final, steely gaze, delivered the knockout blow. "You're out of your league," he whispered. "Let me tell you something," Tyson breathed, his words hanging in the air like a promise. His tone, though hushed, was no less ominous. "When you pick a fight with the wrong man, sometimes you don't get back up the same." The boxer's words were heavy with threat, every syllable dripping with the weight of impending violence. Tyson remained poised, his body coiled like a snake, the embodiment of controlled aggression that demanded respect. His presence alone was enough to shift the atmosphere in the parking lot. The crowd, once quiet, was now murmuring louder, the sound rising in a palpable wave of realization that swept over them. Their attention was rapt, their collective breath held as they watched the unfolding drama. Reynolds, once confident and brash, now stood with a face as pale as a ghost. His eyes widened, dawning horror creeping across his features. You're Mike Tyson?" he stammered, his voice strained and high-pitched. The officer, like a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar, had found himself trapped in a situation spiraling rapidly out of his control. Tyson's smirk, small yet triumphant, was sharp, like a razor's edge, a perfect reflection of the officer's escalating panic. "Now you get it," Tyson said, his words biting and reminding Reynolds of his own hubris. The boxer no longer restrained himself with the desire to avoid conflict. He bared his teeth in a cold smile, the air around him crackling with the potential for violence that seemed ready to erupt at any moment. Yet even with the threat of brutality looming, Tyson remained calm, his body language that of a predator toying with its prey. Reynolds, his eyes darting nervously around the crowd, caught sight of dozens of smartphones. The cameras were trained on him like the lenses of hungry vultures, each one capturing his humiliation. He swallowed hard, the truth of his predicament sinking in, its weight suffocating. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, he lowered the baton, his hand trembling as he fought to maintain his composure. The crowd, sensing his capitulation, began to whisper excitedly. The sound grew louder, their excitement palpable as they watched the bullies fall from grace. But Reynolds remained frozen, his pride reduced to a tattered remnant of what it once was. Mike Tyson's voice rang out clear and unyielding, cutting through the tension like a knife through butter. "Now, are we done here, officer?" Tyson asked, his tone daring, demanding a response. His stance was still poised and ready, the slightest hint of defiance enough to unleash the fury within. Reynolds, his spirit broken, nodded meekly in defeat. It was a small concession, but it was enough to save him from further humiliation. With his face a mask of shame and resignation, the officer turned without a word and strode toward his patrol car. His movements were quick, like that of a wounded animal seeking sanctuary, desperate to escape the scene of his shame. As he disappeared into the safety of his vehicle, the crowd erupted into a chorus of cheers and laughter. Their mirth was a celebration of Tyson's victory and a condemnation of Reynolds' bigotry. Tyson stood amid the chaos, his arms crossed over his chest, a smug smile on his face. He had won, but there was little satisfaction in the moment. It was a perfect coda to the afternoon's events, a scene that would soon be replayed across the digital landscape. Mike Tyson, though retired from the ring, was still a force to be reckoned with. As the crowd continued to cheer, he uncrossed his arms and shook his head in disbelief. The weight of the encounter settled upon his shoulders like a heavy cloak, the laughter of the crowd still ringing in his ears. It was a bittersweet reminder of the absurdity of the situation, a scenario he had encountered far too many times in his life. He approached his car, his hand finding the keys in his pocket with ease. Unlocking the door, he slid into the driver's seat, allowing himself a brief moment of respite. The events of the day were still fresh in his mind, and he couldn't help but reflect on what had just transpired. His hand gripped the steering wheel, his mind racing, but for a moment there was quiet. The roar of the crowd faded as he closed his eyes, letting the adrenaline subside. As he prepared to leave, the first bystander, still caught up in the excitement of the moment, approached him. The young man was grinning from ear to ear, the joy on his face infectious. "Man, that was legendary!" he exclaimed, his words dripping with admiration. Tyson, still processing the aftermath of the event, offered a slight grin in return. Before he could respond, however, another bystander approached him, his expression sincere and filled with gratitude. "Hey, Mr. Tyson," the man said, his words heartfelt. "Thanks for handling that the way you did." Tyson's lips curled into a smirk, the edges of his mouth twitching upward. He could see the sincerity in the man's eyes, but it was the humor that bubbled up in him. "Yeah, well, he's lucky I've mellowed out over the years," Tyson said, his voice dripping with a sly reference to his younger, more volatile self. The crowd, still basking in the afterglow of the spectacle, erupted in laughter. The boxer's quick wit, as sharp as ever, had won them over just as much as his physical prowess had. Tyson's humor was a reminder that even in retirement, he still possessed the biting edge that had made him such an unforgettable figure in the sport. The crowd's laughter rippled through the air, the appreciation of his quick thinking cementing his place as a legend. As the crowd relished the final moments of the event, Tyson slid into the driver's seat of his car, the smile still tugging at his lips. With casual ease, he buckled his seatbelt, the movement almost effortless, betraying none of the power he had just displayed. He turned the ignition, the engine purring to life with a hum of quiet authority. With one final wave to the crowd, he pulled away from the scene, the last remnants of the confrontation vanishing into the distance. The camera, capturing the entire event from a bird's-eye view, slowly began to fade to black. Its lens had been a silent witness to the conclusion of an unlikely tale. Tyson's victory wasn't just one of physical dominance, it was a victory over prejudice and hate, a reminder that sometimes the right man doesn't back down.